When my grandfather passed, I thought I was inheriting a legacy. I was barely 25 when the lawyer handed me the keys to the bar. The Iron Tap was the pride of our small town, a brick and wood tavern that sat like a pillar in the middle of Cherry Street. Patrons came from 3 counties over for the live bar's infamous Iron Tap mule, and of course, the ghost stories. Since I was a kid, my grandfather would tell me about the ghost that lived in the cellar of the bar. He would always tell me, "Don't go down into the cellar alone." At the time, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. I was wrong. My first day as a new bar owner, I went into the cellar with my buddy Tommy, a friend from high school who heard of my inheritance and begged me for a job. It was the day of the reopening, and we needed to restock the well. The cellar was frigidly cold, even though it was summertime. Rows of liquor bottles lined the metal shelves. The concrete floor was cracked in places, and the walls were stained with age. At the far back corner of the cellar was the freezer. At the time, nothing seemed unusual. It was pitch black, and the free dangling light bulb hung from the cellar ceiling at the bottom of the stairs. Tommy and I descended cautiously down into the cellar, the wooden stairs groaning beneath our feet. I reached into the darkness, my fingers twitching above my head, feeling blindly for the pull chain. Before I could switch the light on, Tommy's body jerked forward, crashing into me. Something rushed past the both of us, moving fast along the wall. We heard scraping like nails on stone. Then something shoved me hard enough that I cracked my shoulder against a shelf and sent a bottle of bourbon crashing to the ground. Without hesitation, we bolted back up the stairs, me clutching my shoulder and Tommy hyperventilating. We reached the top of the stairs, and with wide eyes, Tommy stared at me and ran out of the bar. Within 3 weeks, I had cycled through 6 employees. All of them quit after going down to the cellar. They all said they were shoved by something or that a bottle of liquor flew across the room at them. Jenny, a tough-as-nails bartender who had worked in rougher places in the city, was down in the cellar getting some ice when some invisible force shoved her so hard into a shelf that it left a dark bruise across her lower back. One night, another employee, Mark, came flying out of the freezer backwards, landing on his back. He claimed the freezer door had slammed shut on him while he was working. When checking the security cameras, I saw the freezer door slam shut, and I could hear Mark beating on the door from the inside before the door flung back open and Mark was ejected from the freezer. That same night, I was closing up the bar. I turned to close the door to the cellar when I heard footsteps running up the stairs. I slammed the door shut and locked it as fast as I could. I was alone and thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. I had moved into my grandfather's old apartment above the bar. One night, I was going through some of his belongings when I came across an envelope addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. I carefully opened the envelope. It was a letter from my grandfather. It said, "I'm sorry. I tried to contain it for as long as I could, but now that I'm gone, it's loose again. Don't let anyone stay down there long, and don't let them go alone. And for the love of God, don't let it follow you upstairs. Whatever is in the cellar, it isn't human, not anymore. I'll tell you everything." According to my grandpa's letter, the bar opened in 1949, the year he came back from the war. By 1953, the Iron Tap was thriving. But with most of the profits my grandfather earned from the bar, he fell into a gambling habit. And during that period, he got involved with a very dangerous man. This dangerous man went by the name of Arthur, a loan shark and racketeer with a taste for blood. He knew how successful the Iron Tap was, so when my grandfather couldn't pay his debt to Arthur, he gave him a choice: sign over the bar or help him get rid of someone. The Iron Tap was my grandfather's livelihood, and with the amount of gambling debt he had accumulated, there was no way he could give up his bar. So he did the unthinkable. A man named Ray, who was a card shark, was caught cheating the week before in one of Arthur's bars. Ray had a nasty temper and would often fly off the handle when accused of cheating and become incredibly violent. Nobody liked him. nobody would miss him. After a few free drinks, my grandfather lured the drunken drifter into the cellar of the bar. My grandfather shut the door behind him, locking both of them in. Standing at the top of the stairs, watching Ray sway back and forth in his drunken stupor, he shoved Ray, sending him flying down the cellar stairs. Ray lay motionless on the concrete floor below, still breathing. With a full bottle of bourbon, my grandfather delivered one fatal blow to Ray's head. He buried Ray's body in the far corner of the cellar, just outside the freezer door. And that should have been the end of it, but something came back. It started slow, cold spots, shadows that moved when no one else did. My grandfather never told a soul. Racked with guilt, he would say a prayer for Ray every day and left offerings in the corner of the cellar each week. Bottles of whiskey, home-cooked meals, whatever he had. Anything to keep Ray's spirit quiet. According to my grandfather, what haunted him wasn't just a ghost, it was something else, something darker, something far worse than the man Ray ever was in life. Whatever had attached itself to Ray after death had sunk roots deep into the cellar floor, into the bar itself. And my grandfather knew the only thing that kept the evil contained was the thick stone walls and the pact he made when Ray was murdered. And now that Grandpa was gone, the pact was broken. I don't know why I went down there again. Pride, maybe. Maybe I just wanted to see for myself if I could beat the thing my grandfather feared. I brought with me a flashlight and a crowbar I found tucked under the register. The temperature dropped the moment I stepped onto the stairs. It was worse than I remembered. A smell of rot burned my nose. The light bulb above my head flickered and then went out. I turned on my flashlight. That's when I saw it. A black figure standing right where Ray's body was buried. Its breathing was heavy and slow and thick with rage. A low growl rumbled in the corner of the cellar. The door slammed shut behind me. I screamed, swinging the crowbar wildly. Suddenly, the figure shot across the room. In less than a second, it was an inch from my face. It whispered something, but the whisper wasn't in my ear. It was inside my head. It said my grandfather's name, my name. Thoughts that weren't mine filled my head. Anger and hatred. The weight of its presence was suffocating. I whipped the crowbar across the room, and just as soon as the figure appeared in front of me, it was gone. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I just remember standing back at the bar trying to catch my breath. I kept the bar closed for weeks. I never wanted to set foot in the cellar again. Then I remembered my grandfather's letter. One evening, I decided to venture into the cellar again. With me, I brought a bottle of whiskey, a plate of meat and potatoes, and a rosary. It was quiet. I slowly made my way across the cellar floor to the corner and set the bottle and the plate down on top of Ray's grave. Gripping the rosary, I said a quiet prayer. I walked backwards towards the stairs, waiting for a bottle to go flying across the room. Nothing. Since that night, I've carried on my grandfather's tradition of keeping Ray's spirit at peace. The Iron Tap is still open and doing very well. People love the thrill of drinking in a haunted bar. I don't let anyone into the cellar, not without me. Deliveries are left upstairs and bottles are restocked by me alone. Patrons and employees still ask me about the spirit that haunts the cellar of the Iron Tap bar. I never mention my grandfather's secret. I just tell them it's just an old ghost story. When Gabriella called me asking for a favor, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We had been friends since elementary school, and she needed help with some electrical work at her church. The wiring was old and outdated and due for an upgrade. Being an electrician, I was happy to help. Resurrection Church sat at the edge of town, tucked quietly at the bottom of a hill. The building was weathered with stone walls, high stained glass windows, and a steeple that leaned just slightly left. The church had stood as a landmark for generations. Though the building showed its age, there was a gentle kindness within the walls. I pulled into the gravel parking lot just before nightfall. Gabriella was waiting just outside the church doors on the front steps. After a bit of catching up, Gabriella showed me to the basement. The entrance to the basement was through a narrow door just behind the pulpit. It creaked open to reveal a steep set of stairs. The stairway was so narrow I had to turn sideways to pass through. The moment I stepped down, I noticed it was unusually warm. The air was thick and heavy and smelling faintly of old charred wood. I paused halfway down and pulled at my shirt collar. Gabriella said the basement was always warm, even with the AC on. The basement was a cramped, cluttered space with a low ceiling and stone walls. There were shelves with old Bibles, candlesticks, and collection plates that looked as if they had been collecting dust for years. At the far end of the basement hung a row of choir robes on a metal rack. I pulled out my flashlight as I walked further into the pitch-black basement. After a moment of searching, I located the junction box. With much difficulty, I pried it open, revealing a tangled snarl of old wires. I had just began to untangle the mess when I heard a soft rustle behind me. I swung my flashlight around just in time to see the robes swaying back and forth as if someone had just pushed through them. I scanned the room, my eyes flicking back and forth, hoping to spot an animal or feel a breeze, anything to explain the disturbance. But nothing. I figured it was a draft from upstairs. I turned back to the junction box when suddenly a loud smack echoed across the concrete floor. I jolted, my flashlight crashing to the ground. I spun around just in time to see my rolling flashlight shining on an old Bible sitting at my feet. I crouched down to examine it. The edges blackened and scorched. Before I had any time to make sense of anything, a sudden whooshing sound came from the robe rack. The robes were now thrashing violently as if something had just torn through them. I picked up my flashlight and walked over to the robes. I brushed my hand through them, expecting to find an animal or anything that would explain what just happened. As I was shuffling through the rack, a slow, quiet creak made me freeze. The small basement window, which was locked shut, was now wide open. My flashlight began to flicker as I slowly stepped toward the open window. I stood there, heart beating faster, trying to shake the growing unease settling over me. I lifted my hand to the window, needing to feel it, just to be sure it wasn't all in my head. But before I could put my fingers to the glass, it slammed shut right in front of my eyes, and my flashlight flickered off. My flashlight dropped from my hand and hit the concrete with a jarring crack, and I was left standing in complete darkness. I fumbled in my pocket for my lighter. My breath shaking, I struck the flint, and a small flame danced up. Before I could regain my focus, the flame snuffed out. With sweaty hands, I flicked the lighter again, and again the flame blew out. I got down on my hands and knees, running my hands along the dirty concrete, searching for my flashlight. After what seemed like forever of blindly searching, my hand finally closed around the flashlight. I banged it on the heel of my palm, praying it would turn on. The flashlight shot a beam through the darkness across the basement, shining directly at an old mirror on the other side of the room. In the reflection of the dusty mirror mounted above an old sink in the corner, I saw her, a woman standing right behind me. Her face was burned beyond recognition, raw and cracked like old lava rock. The skin sloughed from one cheek, revealing part of her jaw. Her eyes, impossibly wide, stared into mine. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard a rasp of breath like wind through a furnace. I spun around, nothing there. I turned to look at the mirror again and she was gone, but the heat in the basement rose. I stumbled backwards towards the stairs, my heart racing. Then the candle on the old wooden shelf lit by itself. Just a brief single flame before extinguishing instantly. I scrambled back up the stairs, two at a time. The door was jammed, not locked, but pressed. I shoved harder. It wouldn't budge. My breath was shallow, the heat behind me breathing down my neck. Gabriella yanked the door open. Drenched in sweat and pale as a ghost, I asked Gabriella what was in that basement. She hesitated. Her eyes drifted to the stained glass image of an angel above the altar. She took a deep breath and said, "My grandmother died down there. My grandfather was a reverend, served here for 30 years. He had a heart attack in the basement, retrieving supplies before a Sunday service. She was devout, obsessed with him. They say she went a little mad after he died. She refused to accept it. One night, she snuck into the church with her daughter, my mom. Mom was just a kid. They climbed in through that little basement window. She brought candles, a Bible, incense, and a lighter. She was going to call him back, just to talk. She believed if anyone could reach back from the afterlife, it was him. She knocked over a candle during the seance. It rolled under the choir robes. They caught fire. She and my mom tried to run, but the door jammed. Just like it did with you. She lifted my mom up through the window and told her to run for help. My mother ran barefoot to a neighbor's door screaming about a fire. By the time firefighters got here, the basement was engulfed in flames. I closed my eyes, replaying the woman's face in the mirror. Burned, broken. But those eyes, there was something in them that didn't feel angry. Gabriella swallowed hard and looked down at her hands, fingers laced together tight. "I've noticed," she began softly. "It's calmer during the day. The flickers, the noises, they're quieter." She looked up at me. "If you can choke up the courage to go back into the basement during the day, I'll go with you. You won't be alone." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, casting soft pools of color over the wooden pews. The warmth of the day reached even the narrow door behind the pulpit. I hesitated at the top of the steps, toolbox in hand. Gabriella was beside me, steady like a quiet anchor. We descended together. The basement looked different in the daylight, still cramped, still cluttered, but the harshness had faded. The low stone walls held a stillness. I knelt at the junction box, pulling out my tools. Gabriella stayed near, her arms wrapped loosely around herself, but her chin lifted. As I worked, the smell of scorched wood from the night before had dulled to a faint memory. Suddenly, a breeze that wasn't a breeze brushed my arm, cool and light. The air filled with the faint scent of lavender incense. A single candle on the shelf flickered to life, its flame small and steady. "Hello, Grandma," Gabriella whispered. Her voice was warm. I tightened the last screw on the junction box and stood up. Gabriella and I both looked over at the mirror, but there was nothing there. Just warm sunlight pouring in through the narrow window, reflecting off the mirror and illuminating the basement into a glowing halo of dust. Gabriella reached over and squeezed my hand. The candle flickered once, like a nod, before going out. People often fear the presence of spirits, but maybe they're not always trying to scare us. Maybe they're just trying to be remembered. Sunlight streamed through the wide bay windows of our new home, illuminating a film of dust that danced in the air. The house, with its high ceilings and empty rooms, echoed with possibility. My wife, Laura, and I spent the first few days marching in and out of the front door, our arms full of boxes and our hearts full of hope. We teased each other as we unpacked, our chocolate lab, Sammy, excitedly sniffing every corner of our new space. The house was far from finished, but it already felt perfect. After a few days, the inevitability of laundry started to become apparent. Clothes started piling up in the hamper at the top of the basement stairs. Neither of us wanted to haul the load down to the washing machine, but it had to be done. Despite the cozy charm of our new home, Laura and I, and even Sammy, had shared an uneasy feeling about our basement. It seemed to be the only fault in our perfect new home. The basement was structurally sound, however, the shift in the air was noticeable the moment you opened the door. The realtor told us the previous owners were into holistic remedies, burning herbal mixes to cleanse the space of negative energy. They even sealed the vents to keep the smoke in. We just assumed the strange smell was due to all of the burning herbs and concoctions. Laura had left for the grocery store that morning, and I'll admit I didn't want to go down into the basement alone. clothes hamper in hand, I nodded towards Sammy. He ducked his head down, his droopy brown eyes tilted up at me. He didn't move an inch. I stared down the narrow staircase and descended into the basement. The odor that hit me caused me to pull my head back. It was thick and sour like rot and mildew. The stench clung to the back of my throat. The space smelled of old earth and still water. The concrete walls were still damp in most places. There was a small, narrow window just above the washing machine, but the walls seemed to swallow any light rather than reflecting it. The light switch didn't work, so I was walking almost blindly down the staircase. My only light source came from the open door at the top of the stairs. I had not been down here since our first viewing of the house. There were still some strange items belonging to the previous owners. Shelves with bottles filled with odd mixtures, boxes full of iron nails and horseshoes, and a row of mirrors all facing the narrow window above the washing machine. When I reached the bottom of the wooden stairs, I looked up and I could see Sammy peering down at me from the top. His body was pinned to the floor, his paws hanging down from the top step. I could hear him softly whining at me. I walked over to the sectioned off corner of the basement where the washer and dryer were. I felt a world away from the rest of the house. The air in the basement felt heavy and damp, like a wet cloth clinging to my skin. I unloaded our clothes into the washing machine as fast as I could. I dropped the hamper and it hit the floor with a thud when a centipede ran across the top of my foot. The shiver running up the back of my neck was broken by Sammy's bark at the top of the stairs. As I bent down to grab the hamper, something caught my eye, a necklace half hidden beneath the washing machine. I reached for it and pulled it free, revealing a Saint Benedict medal dangling from the chain. The sight of it stirred a memory. I remembered that symbol from when Laura and I attended Catholic school together. I tucked the necklace into my pocket and loaded the rest of the clothes into the washing machine. Shaking off my nerves, I bent down and picked up the hamper, eager to head back upstairs. As soon as I turned around, I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't alone. Peering into the corner of the basement, I felt a certain dread of someone or something watching me, my pupils stretching wide to take in what little light there was. The light from the open door at the top of the stairs seemed to cast a shadow darker than the darkness surrounding it. At first, it was just a still shadow. Then all of a sudden, the shadow shape shifted and disappeared behind a stack of old boxes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My ears perked when I heard a sharp clicking sound coming from behind the boxes. The click was slow but steady and seemed to be getting louder. After a couple moments of absolute silence, I saw them. 5 long black fingers curled around the edge of the box, scratching across the cardboard like dead wood. My breath caught between my chest and my throat. The fingers were slender and crooked, the nails like long hooks. I stood frozen as I watched a single finger tapping the side of the box in a slow, deliberate rhythm. A high-pitched groan creeped from behind the box, followed by the sound of clicking wet teeth. Cold sweat began dripping down my back. The feeling of sharp spines pricked at the back of my neck. Just then, an ear-piercing shriek rose from the corner of the basement, like hot steam escaping from a boiling mouth. The sound of the scream rattled my skull. Sammy's wild barking at the top of the stairs was enough to snap me out of my paralysis. My body jerked into motion like a puppet being cut from its strings. I tore my way up the stairs. I could hear the sound of claws ripping at the wood, a sound that sent hot ice down my spine. I could feel the talons slashing at my heels, missing only by inches. Without turning around, I slammed the basement door shut and pressed the weight of my back against it like a shield. Just as I locked the deadbolt, something slammed into the other side of the door. A wet clicking sound like broken teeth gnashing together rattled the doorknob. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and fumbled for the necklace. My fingers wrapped around it, trembling. I clenched it tightly in my fist, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The moment I did, the rattling and groaning behind the door went silent. Sammy and I sat silently on the front steps, the necklace locked tightly in my hand like a lifeline. When Laura pulled into the driveway, I wasted no time telling her what happened in the basement. As I held out the necklace, her expression shifted. Her eyes widened with disbelief. She recognized the symbol immediately. That night, without question, we packed our things and left to stay at her sister's place a few hours away. The clothes remained in the basement along with whatever hellish entity was locked down there. The only thing we kept was the necklace.